أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We started the review of Surah at-Talaq, Surah number 65 of the Quran, on the first day of Ramadhan, and inshallah today we are going to conclude with the last ayat number 12. Just to go through an overview, I would like to just highlight some of the points in the first 11 ayat before we conclude with the last ayat. And this is a surah which started with the words Ya Ayyuhan Nabi, addressing the Prophet himself. And right in the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the timing when the divorce is to be done. And then the issue of, calculating or remembering the time of the iddah. And then immediately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before talking about where would be the residence of the wife who is being divorced by the husband, he begins by saying, Wattaqullah, fear displeasing Allah, Rabbukum, who is your Lord. And then he says that, you're not allowed to throw them out of their homes during the time of the iddah. And then we go on to the warning that Allah has, that these are the hudud, the limits that Allah has imposed upon you, and whoever transgresses that, Allah, is going to punish him. And that person would be harming himself by, defying the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the end of that first ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you don't know the reason why this iddah period is there for 3 months. Perhaps, Allah will bring about something. Your mind will change. You will be revoking the divorce before it comes to the final stage after 3 months. Then he goes on to talk about that what happens at the end of the iddah time, either retain them honorably or separate them honorably. There is no third option of keeping a wife suspended, neither divorced nor married. And then we come to the ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the witnessings, that there are 2 adil witnesses required in reciting the talaq. This is one of the main distinction of the Shia fiqh. It is based on this ayat of Quran. Unfortunately, in the Sunni fiqh, this is not part of the essential requirements of the talaq, and that's why you hear the stories that the husband just comes in and says, talaq, 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 it is done. Now, when you hear the story, unfortunately, even our people are so much unaware about this issue. They also think that even in our system, they say 3 times, talaq, 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 it's done. No, in our system, you have the marriage, aqd was done, then the talaq becomes first, and then the second nikah, with the same individuals here. And then the second talaq, this becomes second. And then the third nikah and the third talaq after that becomes the third talaq. So there is no, 3 talaq in one saying. As I said before, even if you do it 9 times or 18 times, it is still 1. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again, this is the highlight of the surah, that after explaining any simple rule, he comes to this issue of warning or kind of, giving some promises. Whoever believes in Allah and the last day, this advice is for him. And then, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ, and whoever fears displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He shall make a way out for him and provide for him from whence he does not even expect. Then he talks about the issue tawakkul. Even in the most disliked act like talaq, remember the taqwa of Allah and put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Going on to ayat number 4, where we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then talks about different situations of different women, whether they are in the time when they have cycles or after that, or the issue of pregnant women. Again, repeating the words, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ, whoever fears displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He shall make his affairs easy for him. And this is Allah's command that He has revealed to you. Therefore, fear Allah, and if you fear displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will cover your evil deeds by forgiving you and magnify the reward of your good deeds. Again, the issue of, where do you place them? You have to provide for them during the time of the iddah, if they are pregnant, all the way till the childbirth. And then the issue of, feeding the child and whether you have to pay to the wife or not. All issues we have talked about it. And then in ayat number 7, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically says this, yes, the provision has to be there, but this duty is imposed on the husband according to his ability. Because Allah cannot burden on a person any duty which is beyond their capacity. Ayat number 8. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now says, look at the stories of the nations that I destroyed in the past because they defied the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messengers. Defiance was the reason why Allah destroys the nations and the ummats who came before. And so this is where you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, be careful. If you do the same thing, I can do the same thing even to you. And again, coming back to the issue of, wattaqullah, fear Allah, fear displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ya ulil albab, alladhina amanu, O you who possess intelligence, who believe. And we spent one evening just the night before where we emphasize this point, ulil albab, people who have intelligence. And alladhina amanu has been, merged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to say that you have intelligence. Look at the past history, see what the defiance of Allah's law did to the nations before. Therefore, remember this, reflect on it, and learn lesson from it. More so because, fear Allah, because Allah has not left you without a messenger, without a reminder in form of a messenger who recited the ayat of Quran to you, and he was sent so that he may bring you out of zulamat, out of the shades of darkness into the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the last ayat that we looked at it last night, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, if you do this, if you follow the commandments that I have sent down, especially about family laws, then those who are believers and do good deeds, Allah says He shall admit him into gardens beneath which rivers flow, to abide in them forever, and Allah has certainly been excellent in provision for him. This is where we come to the last ayat now. So after all these rules and regulations and the emphasis on taqwa, fearing displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even giving promise that if you have taqwa, I'll make things easy for you, I'll find you a way out of your problems, I'll forgive your sins, multiply the reward for your good deeds, and this is the Jannah at the end. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends with one ayat where the emphasis basically is Allahu alladhi khalaqa sab'a samawat wa min al-ard mithlahunna يتنزل الأمر بينهن لتعلموا أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. This is the last ayat of the surah. It is Allah who has created 7 heavens and of the earth similar to them, 7 earth. The command gradually descends through them that you may know that Allah has power over all things and that Allah comprehends all things in knowledge. This is to make us realize that defiance of Allah's law should not be taken lightly. It's not that He is going to forget. It's not that, He doesn't have the ability to know what we do. That, He doesn't have the power to punish us in this dunya as well as in the akhirah. To emphasize this point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, remember that I am your creator. And He begins by saying, He is the one who created sab'a samawat. وَمِنَ الْأَرْضِ مِثْلَهُنَّ. He created 7 heavens. And, so you have what we see now, and 6 other layers, if I may call it, and even the earth. There are different levels, layers of the earth. Now, what does it mean? This is where I would like to go to a slide of about 2 years ago. We did Surah Al-Mulk during that month of Ramadan in that year. And this issue of 7 heavens, samawat sab'a, had been discussed that, so I'll just go back to that instead of, reworking on it. This is 2014. الَّذِي خَلَقَ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ طِبَاقًا. This is the very early ayat of Surah Mulk, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by saying, تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. And then the ayat after that is the one where it says الذي خلق سبع سماوات طباقا. He created 7 heavens in layers. طباق, طبقة, one after another. So if you have a 5-story building, we say 5 tabaqa. And that's where the word tabaq comes from. Now, this statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created 7 heavens in layers has occurred 9 times in the Quran. And, this idea of 7 heavens existed even before Islam. It is there in the earlier books, and even the scientists and philosophers of the ancient time used to talk about it. With the introduction of the Greek astronomy, even Muslims who got influence during the time of Banu Abbas, the issue of 9 planets came in, and the scholars actually tried to reconcile, this concept of 9 planets with sab'a samawat. And basically they came with their own qiyas, their own arbitrary tafsir about it. Interestingly, there are about 20 different opinions about what do sab'a samawat mean. From Abu Ali Sina, basically he explains when he looks at 9 planets according to the Greek astronomy, he says, well, the 2 of them are special one, Arsh and Malaika, and so he left with the 7. So they are arbitrary, way of trying to reconcile Sab'a Samawat of Quran with what they knew at the time. Then you have Khaja Nasruddin Tusi, somehow trying to bring number 9 planets to 7 to reconcile with the ayat of Quran. Allah Majlisi has some modification on the views of Ibn Sina. You have Hadi Sabzawari. All the way going to even people like Nasir al-Makarim Shirazi of the contemporary times, where he says, what we see up here is the first layer of the 7 heavens, and this is the lowest one. What is up there, we don't know, but it is there. Which is the literal translation of the ayat of Quran. Allama Tabatabai somehow tries to give a symbolic meaning to Sab'a Samawat, where he says, 7 levels of qurb to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, I would say, with all due respect to a mufassir whom I refer to all the time, there is still arbitrary opinion. Basically, when we look at it, the literal meaning of the sama, sab'a samawat. Sama means something which is high. And therefore the word sumu is used for the people, for the leaders. He is a highly respected person. And Quran has used it in both physical meaning as well as in symbolic meaning. And what does the word sab'a mean? Again, this is the beauty of the Arabic language. In Arabic language, the word sab'a used in two senses. One is the literal meaning of seven. So you have, items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But there is another meaning of it, which is that 7 doesn't mean necessarily 7. It just means multiple. So this is the vastness of the Arabic language, that sometimes you have to be careful to look at the context to realize whether it is to be taken in the literal sense or in the meaning of plentifulness. And so then we go back to this issue. So what does sab'a samawat mean here? In this ayat and the other ayat, especially in Surah at-Talaq, basically keeping in mind it refers to the 7 heavens just like our own, the one that we have. And when we talk about our own system, the entire solar system is under that one sama that we see. What is beyond that, Quran says, there are sab'a samawat, and we don't have a choice but to believe in it. We don't know, nobody has gone there, we cannot explain it in that way, but we will have to accept that. Or you go with the interpretation given by Allama Tabatabai, that this is more a spiritual, 3 levels or stations, which is, this is how he looks at this issue. And so going back to the Tafsir of Surah at-Talaq, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just trying to emphasize this point, that I am your creator. I created everything. I know what you do, whether it's a very simple thing or major issues that you do. Everything is recorded. You have the 2 malak there, and there are many, many other witnesses, including our own body. There was a time when it was difficult to even understand the ayat of Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, a time will come where your julud, your skin, will testify against you. And the scene that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala portrays of that day is that, when the person will be asked about things, and if he denies, there will be witnesses there. There will be Nami Amal, as we call it, the scroll of deeds. And then even our organs, Surah Yasin. But Allah says, I'll put a seal on your mouth. You will not speak. Your limbs will speak what you had done. And so there is one ayat in Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, your skin will testify against you. And so the fellow will later on turn around and say, why did you do this? Because if I go to Jahannam, you are me. And this is where, the skin of the person will respond, and that, Allah is the one who has created speech in everything that He wants. He created speech, and antaqan Allah. He made us speak. And when we speak, in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will speak nothing but the truth. And so this is where we have to realize that, and again, the limbs and the body parts will say, you were thinking there was nobody there. You didn't respect us. You didn't realize we were there also, witnessing what you are doing. And so don't blame us on this issue. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by saying that, He has power over everything, and especially the last ayat. Let me go back to that. وَلِتَعْلَمُوا, so that you may know that Allah has power over everything. وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ أَحَاطَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا. Allah, comprehends all the things as far as knowledge is concerned. So nothing is hidden from Him. In Surah Luqman, the example is given is of khardal, mustard seed. I think once I brought it here in a small plastic bag just to see whether we can see it or not. It's so small. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the words of Luqman that whatever you do, even if it is as small as the size of the mustard seed, we will bring that in front of you on the day of Qiyamah. And so especially in the context of talaq, which is the most disliked act that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to do, He says, be careful. Be careful about it. And this is where we see the double emphasis about the issue of talaq. I talked about the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. On the 10th of Ramadan, when we had the majlis for Bibi Khadija salawatullah alayha, referring to the earlier ayat from Surah At-Tahrim. Surah At-Tahrim is just the next surah after this. I was initially thinking that I might be able to finish this in 1 week, so we'll go to the second surah in the second week. But anyway, I got, extended on this issue, so we'll leave it for some other time. But the point is that although we discuss the rulings about talaq, the hurdles that Sharia puts in it, even though we say that this is, dislike permission, nonetheless it is a permission. But remember, that is the last resort. Rasulullah's example is there. He sometimes would be harassed by his wives. And we gave the example from Surah Tahrim. There was one case on the same day, not from that surah, but within the history, where the Prophet became so upset with one of the wives that he actually kind of stayed away from her for 1 month. And this is where we see that, talaq is not to be taken that lightly. You have to do whatever you can, because the ajr and sawab is there with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As I said, there are many people, like Nuh, who are in a way suffering, but remember the sabr of Nuh. There are many people like Asiya, many women like Asiya who are suffering from husbands like Fir'aun. But there was no story of talaq in Surah Tahrim. It was just the issue of sabr and, maintaining the dignity. Of course, I would never ever say that, you should tolerate violence. No, that is a no totally. But if it is other than that, it is kind of imtihan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not only test human beings by sickness and loss of wealth or loss of, children or things like that. Even the akhlaq of one another is a very important issue. Let me end with the story of a famous companion of the Prophet, if I remember the name, Sa'ad, who died in the lifetime of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He was respected by the Prophet so much that when he died, the Prophet himself got involved in the process of, janazah, to supervise things are done in the right way, correctly. And then he went into the janazah of that person barefooted. And he was walking as if, he was making sure he does not step on somebody else's feet. Although nobody was around him, kind of crowding around him. And so when the companions asked about it, they said, there were malaika who would come for the funeral of this person. But then, After the burial and everything is done, the mother comes to the grave, the mother of this companion. And she, in a way, addressed her son, saying that you are honored. And you have this privilege that a person like Rasulullah was there forward in your janazah. And this is where, and so you are definitely, forgiven. And this is where Rasulullah says to her that don't say that. You don't know. You don't know what is happening to him now as far as Fashar Qabr is concerned. Because he was good in many, many, aspects of his life. But he was always rude to his wife. His khulq and his behavior with his wife was not good. And now he's suffering the consequences. And so this is where we have to realize that, sometimes our ibtihan is with those who are very close to us. It is there right in the family itself. And keep that in mind, and inshallah, with the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will find a makhraj, a way out of the problems that individuals face. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Inshallah, we'll conclude this surah now, and tomorrow's mahfil about Imam Hassan Mushtaba alayhi salatu wassalam. Will be linked to this whole issue of talaq in the life of the second Imam. So we are not yet done with it until tomorrow, inshallah.